The deep state has a secret weapon, and that secret weapon is more powerful than all the military forces and airplane carriers and all the rest of it that you can think of. That secret weapon is your children, right? They have 87% of America's children are sitting in government indoctrination centers 5 days a week, 6 to 8 hours a day, for 12 years minimum, right? Many of them are in there for 14 years if you do kindergarten and pre-K, then another 4 years or 8 years if they go get a university degree. And all these parents say, oh, I'll just unbrainwash them during dinner. I'll just make sure they go to Sunday school. That's not going to work, folks, right? The government school system is the deep state's ultimate tool to prepare our children for the destruction of our liberty, for the destruction of our country. And if you look at the data, it is absolutely clear that that's what's happening. So over the last few months, I've actually been on a nationwide tour of the United States talking about this very issue. We call it the Rescuing Our Children Tour. And so all this that I've been telling you about the deep state, you know, all those episodes we did, the Bilderberg, the Council on Foreign Relations, the Trilateral Commission, the Skull and Bones, the communism, all of this stuff, there's a common thread running through all of it, and that is the government school system. So consider, for example, first of all, the history of how we even got to this situation. If you look at the people who were involved in setting up the government school system, what you'll find is that they were communists, humanists, socialists, and they wanted to use the government school system to fundamentally transform America, to quote Barack Hussein Obama. And that's exactly what they've been doing, right? John Dewey, let's take John Dewey as an example. He's universally credited as, or blamed, depending on your point of view, as the founding father of America's public school system. And, you know, he deserves that, him and Horace Mann. And he was very transparent about his views. He went to the Soviet Union and loved what Lenin was doing over there. He wanted to use the school system, first of all, to turn your children into little communists, little socialists, and second of all, to indoctrinate them against God and in favor of his false religion of humanism, the idea that man can be his own little God, that we don't need God to tell us what's right and wrong, that we can decide that for ourselves. And of course, he rejected the very existence of God. He was one of the authors and co-signers of the first Humanist Manifesto, and they'll tell you right there in the first plank that religious humanists, you know, to their credit, they at least acknowledged that this was their religion. They said religious humanists regard the universe as self-existing and not created. So what should we expect from that? What are the implications of that? Well, to start with, our founding fathers in America said God created us and God gave us our rights. Well, what happens if you believe, as John Dewey did, that God doesn't exist? Well, that means you don't have any God-given rights, right? That's step one in undermining our freedom in America, is getting people to believe that our rights come from government, not from God. And so this has been a crucial tool of the deep state. Go find a high school student today and ask them about God-given rights. They'll say, what do you mean God-given rights? That's religious mumbo jumbo, right? Our founding fathers didn't think that was religious at all. They said it was a self-evident truth. And yet the public school system has indoctrinated our children to reject this self-evident truth. The implications of that are incredibly dangerous. Then they're teaching our kids to be global citizens, to embrace sustainable development, right? If you look at Agenda 21, for example, they'll tell you in Chapter 36 that education is indispensable for changing the attitudes, the values, the beliefs of your children. They'll tell you that education is critical for promoting sustainable development. And it is. If you want to brainwash children to reject freedom, to reject private property, to reject the family, you're going to have to do a lot of brainwashing, which the UN euphemistically describes as education. Agenda 2030, which we did a recent episode on, they'll tell you the same thing. Goal number 4, all deals with education. They say the kids need to be so indoctrinated, they're going to promote sustainable development, right? And so we need to recognize, when George H.W. Bush said we're going to have this new world order where a credible United Nations would use its peacekeeping forces to bring about the vision of the UN's founders, which included mass murderer Joseph Stalin and his American agent Alger Hiss, who ended up becoming the first leader of the United Nations. Well, if they're going to bring that all about, George Bush said, when we are successful, and we will be, right? No doubt at all in his mind or in his voice, in his statements. The reason why is they have your children, right? And so all these people out there who think they're going to fight tyranny with their guns, or who are going to fight tyranny by electing a good congressman, those are not sustainable strategies. If we are going to defeat the deep state, if we are going to preserve our nation and our freedom in the face of this attack by the deep state, we need to recognize that education is going to have to be the crucial tool, right? It is for the deep state, right? They're using the education system, the public school system, to brainwash our children, to reject the family, to embrace globalism, to embrace all these kooky totalitarian ideas. If we don't take back control of the education of our children, they are going to succeed. It's almost inevitable at this point. So we need to recognize education needs to be the central part of our strategy, and not just the education of our communities and fellow adults and our neighbors and our leaders. That's a part of it, but even more importantly is the education of our children. So we're urging parents everywhere to take back control of their children from the deep state. Get your children out of the public school system. Now one of the things we looked at is where this is all going. We have Common Core, which people think is the nationalization of education. In fact, Common Core is the globalization of education, and they'll tell you this. Bill Gates, who put $2 billion of his own money, signed an agreement with UNESCO about 10 years before that, saying they were going to create a master global syllabus, a master global curriculum. The UN now has the World Core curriculum, they call it. And it's a very, very serious thing. You can read it on UNESCO's website. The guy who created it, Assistant Secretary General of the UN, Robert Mueller, actually explained in the foreword to the teacher's manual for this World Core curriculum that it was based on the teachings of Alice Bailey. Now, if you want to know what they plan for your children, just go look up Alice Bailey. Go read the books that she wrote through these ascended masters. It sounds crazy, right? But if you know anything about Alice Bailey, she was the founder of the Lucifer Publishing Company. She claimed to be in communication with these so-called ascended masters, these wackadoodle, these spiritual entities that would allegedly write these books through her, like Education in the New Age, where she promotes Marxism. She says that we need to use the cooperative methods advocated by John Dewey to bring about this world federation, this world government with a world brain and a world religion. That's what they're preparing your children for, folks. Don't hand your children over to the deep state by putting them in a public school. That is, again, their key tactic. Brainwash the children. Hitler understood that, right? Stalin understood that. Chairman Mao understood that. Whoever controls the minds of the children will end up ruling the day. And we need to recognize that too. So, the very first and most important thing you can do as an activist for what's right, for freedom, for America, is to protect your children from indoctrination, to make sure they get a good, solid, God-centered education, and to do it now, right? Don't say, well, I'm going to go to all the school board meetings, I'm going to run for the state legislature. That stuff's all nice, but I compare it to a burning building. If you saw the building was burning, you'd run in there and get your child and run in the opposite direction. Because why? The fire would hurt your child physically, right? Well, these public schools, and you don't have to take my word for it, the government's data will show this, these public schools will hurt your child not just physically, but mentally and morally and spiritually and academically and intellectually. Get that child out and run in the opposite direction as fast as you can, and then we can discuss what to do about the fire, because the fire is important. We got to deal with that. We don't want it to burn down our whole community, but we need to recognize that step one, get your child out of the fire, right? Then we can talk about what we do about the fire. That is the deep state's tool. We got to get serious about this. I'm Alex Newman, folks. This is Behind the Deep State. Thank you so much for watching, and make sure you like, share, subscribe, all those great things, and tune back in next week for another episode of Behind the Deep State. Thanks, and God bless.